Hey, hello everyone. My name is Josette Pinto, and this is the fall 2021 class of EALC 360 Buddhist Art in Korea. And my article that I will be presenting on today is Ghostly Encounters, Perceptions of Death and Afterlife in Goryeo and Early Joseon by Michael Pettit. So about the author, Michael Pettit is a professor of Korean studies at Binghamton University in New York City, and he authored the book and Korean Cuisine and Illustrated History, as well as receiving his PhD at the University of Hawaii in Manoa. So the main statement of this article is of the idea that the living harbor guilt towards people that die, and that is what fuels their belief in ghosts. And he also states that injustice does not die with the physical body, and rather that it lives on into the afterlife. And this is a combination of Buddhist beliefs as well as shamanistic retribution, which is very similar to other beliefs in Korea that are mixed and not simply Buddhist or shamanistic. And his final argument is the use of ghosts as a vessel for social criticism, especially in literary works. The author does not necessarily use a lot of different kinds of analysis and focuses mainly on literary analysis. And his main sources are from two places: short stories from historical records, which are believed to be nonfiction and would be what would considered at that time would be more believable, as well as longer narratives that are from Tonggi, which were made for entertainment. And the author does have a caveat in the opening of his article saying that while the longer narratives are not necessarily believed to be real, it is still reflective of what they thought of ghosts at the time. So a couple of terminology terms that were in there. So didactic is something that is intended to teach, and he used this word in the context of some of the stories are didactic as well, but others are purely encounters based on guilt. Eschatological is anything related to death, and inter is to place a corpse in a grave or tomb with funeral rites. And this is important in that many of the bodies cannot move on from the afterlife before having funeral rites placed on their body, which is why they continue to roam in the human world. Yangban is just the upper status elites, which is, we see some differences in the kinds of encounters between Yangban and the regular class. And hegemonic is something that's ruling or dominant in a political or social context. Okay, so his first main argument is about the connection between ghosts and guilt. And so his argument, his evidence for this is that for the social inequities, especially, is the songgakshi ghost. So songgakshi is a kind of ghost that were unmarried women, likely virgin women as well, who were shunned from their communities for not having any perceived physical beauty at the time. And after shunned from their communities, they would die and come back to haunt the members of their community. And they were considered to be one of the most feared kinds of ghosts at the time. Another example would be servants who were beaten to death. And the story of Tugok was she was a slave that worked for the family of the prince, and the prince had a fondness for Tugok, and the wife, out of jealousy, had her brutally murdered. And afterwards, she that is said that Tugok's ghost came back to haunt the family, and for after that, the prince's entire family members all died being tortured in prison, and his one surviving heir was both blind and deaf, which is said to be a punishment from the heavens. And the final example that the author uses is of Sondor's Wind, which is the story of the king wanted to be escorted to an island off the shore, and the boatmen went towards a dangerous spot, and the king saw this as an attempt to harm him, and in fear murdered the man. However, since he decided to go over there, it was actually a lot safer and they avoided a storm. So the death of the boatman, now every year, there's a very strong and violent wind that blows, and it is said to be his spirit blowing towards that spot. So these are stories about how the guilt from having hurt these people, there are consequences afterwards. So the second argument that the author makes is about justice beyond the grave, and that people that are wronged, especially very victimized ghosts, will become ghosts that have grudges that they cannot leave. So one of the biggest ones is the story of Arang and the magistrate. This is a very famous story, and essentially there's a young girl named Arang who was murdered in an attempt to resist being raped, and her murderer hid her body, and her father did not know and assumed she ran away. And so she went up to each magistrate from then on, trying to get them to help find her body, but they died one after one because of fear, until she found someone with a courageous enough heart to help her find her body and bring her murderer to justice so that she could move on. And ghosts like this are called wongri, and so those are some of the most dangerous ghosts you can have, because they are trying to get revenge on those that wrong them. One of the examples of this is the story of Tong Jizang and Kim Bushik, and essentially they were literary rivals, and Jizang was always known to be better than Bushik at everything with writing, and Jizang was murdered by Bushik in an uprising, a military uprising. And afterwards, when trying to compose poetry, it is said that Jizang's ghost came to haunt Bushik and murdered him out of pure fear from the grave. So he could not handle he was inferior even after he died. So another interesting point that the author makes is about how the concept of ghosts can be used to criticize the social structures. So this is a genre of literary genre that were known as dream records. And so through ghosts, the authors of the time could subvert norms and provide sharper social criticism. So, for example, the story of Wonseng, the dream record of Master Wan, was used to criticize the usurpation of King Sejong, which at the time was a very difficult and questionable position to hold. However, by using a ghost as the main narrator and focal point of the story, he was able to make that point without having a lot of trouble be tied back to himself. And since the critique isn't coming directly from the writer, you cannot say anything about a critique coming from the dead because they are already dead. And so it is a very powerful tool that they could use. And the final point that the author makes is about female virgin ghosts. So There are many, many stories about females that died as virgins and come back as ghosts with a very strong sense of sexuality that would hold power over men that and what would lead them to be something that was feared and needed to be controlled. And so it is said that the female sexual desire um, was so strong that it was carried to the afterlife. And it's interesting because there are no cases of this with male virgin ghosts. There are no stories of male virgin ghosts wanting to, or nearly none. However, there are many stories of women, and part of the reason why is because strong women, especially in sexuality, will undermine a man's strength and make it something to fear and run away from. So one of the examples is about the Sacheonggam. Yin Mo was lured by a beautiful ghost one night, and he was supposed to leave, and she kept followed him and asked to stay the night, which they did. And after they did once, she kept coming back for him, and he knew after 3 times that he would never be able to get away from her if he did. And so he denied her and told her to leave. And in her wake, there was like said to be a flurry of like a tornado struck through the town with cuts in the wood and everything. So that is what is known of the strength of the female ghosts. So in critiquing the author about this article, the arguments are pretty solid. However, the author only relies on literary analysis, and there is no other mention of anything else, which works for the topic because this is more about a social history, therefore is understandable in a way that that is what it's about. However, it would be a lot of a stronger argument had the author used any sort of secondary reference, such as stylistic analysis and analyzing similar paintings or images about the same subject. However, that being said, there are a very extensive list of primary sources, which is one of the main factors for the author having a strong argument in that all of his sources come directly from historical court documents. And so since they are direct from the court, it is a lot more believable and convincing. The author could have, there are a couple points the author makes that I don't particularly believe with, and one of them is that for female sexuality, the reason that it carries on into the afterlife is a desire to become a mother, and I do not believe that those directly correlate, and he does not provide any evidence to back up that statement, and then just throws it in at the end of his argument there, and I feel that he could have done a better job in strengthening that point. However, everything else that he said was done decently and it was convincing. Okay, well, thank you very much. This has been my presentation. I hope you enjoyed.